Good day. Good day, good day. Let me pull up my notes here. There we go. Where'd they go? There it is. So today, as you've noticed, hopefully from the chapter or the title, and we're in the book of Esther. And just a couple quick notes on why we're in Esther. I've been after I did the book of Daniel, I've been all through the book of Daniel. I was talking to the Lord, what book to do next, And a couple had popped into my mind, but nothing kind of really settled there. And the whole time, my wife was saying, "Let's do Esther. Let's do Esther." And I'm like, okay. And I'm gonna probably say something chauvinistic, but it's like Esther's for women's studies. Why would I want to do Esther? I know the story. It's I know the queen. I know Mordecai. I know it. But she kept saying it, and every time she said it, it's like, you know what? I think I'm supposed to do the book of Esther. And so here I am in the book of Esther. I've read through it a couple times so far, digging into it, really enjoying it. And so let me start off with a couple things about Esther. First off, the writer is unknown. There's nobody actually pens their name and says, "I wrote the book of Esther." But it is it's believed to be a Hebrew author just because of the words in the language that's written in it. That there's to believe, the belief is that it's of a Hebrew author. God's name is never mentioned in it, and so there's been kind of like, as I've read through this, several times now, I kind of have just a few issues going forward. I won't call them issues, but they're just items that were kind of make me go, make me ponder. Mordecai, and we'll talk more about that. Mordecai, he seems, suspect to me. He seems like a schemer, yet he's a man of God. And so there's this duality going on with Mordecai that we'll discuss more as we get into the book. Esther, is she a hero, or is she, manipulated by Mordecai? So there's a whole bunch of duality going on with Esther, and I'm sure God will unfold all of this before us. And I mentioned that God's not mentioned, the name of God is not mentioned in Esther, which is okay. That's interesting. But also keep in mind, Song of Solomon, God's name's not mentioned in that too. So it's not in bad company. I teach history for a living. That's what I do. I'm a high school teacher. I teach history. And this is kind of an interesting chapter for me too, because and I've also, as I've gone through this book, because I'm ahead of you guys, obviously, and having read through the whole thing and starting to study and be entrenched in several chapters ahead. But it's kind of been interesting for me too, because Xerxes is one of the main characters. Some translations translate him as Xerxes, and some translate him as a different name, which we'll talk about. And every time I see his name, as the King James says it, my mind superimposes Xerxes. And I have to say, I have to back up. With Xerxes, I used to hold him on a pretty high pedestal as a history teacher, as a Persian, for what he had done for unifying the empire and going against Greece. Yes, he was a failure. Yes, Greece held him off, but some of the reasons why he was held off was because problems at home. And so I have come to look at Xerxes different. I've come to look at Xerxes as a man missing discernment. And I mean, you read that, the historians, you keep in mind, the Greeks wrote a lot of history, so you see a lot of history in that time frame through the Greeks' eyes, and the Greeks hated Xerxes, so they said bad things about him. But I mean, there's things like where he got mad at the water and attacked the water when he was going into Greece and stuff like that. But from the biblical standpoint, I look at Xerxes much different after going through this book, and I think you will too. And so let me set some context, because where the book of Esther falls, and there's probably 4 or 5 books that kind of line up. You got Daniel and Jeremiah were contemporaries from 2 different angles, with the beginning of the captivity. You've got Ezra as the captives are set free. And then about 30 years later, you get Esther. Okay, and so that kind of gives you an idea. And so backing up too with it, if you're unfamiliar with how did the Jews get into captivity, Israel's last king is Solomon, and then they become divided with a northern and a southern portion. Eventually, the northern portion is taken captive into Assyria, and the southern part is left alone. And then eventually the Babylonians come in and they take over Assyria and take the southern portion captivity. And then, so here we've got all the Jews captive for 70 years. And then Persia is going to take over. Okay, and so if you were with me through the book of Daniel, that's probably familiar with you. If not, I just wanted to go over with you. And so we see in the book of Ezra, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, the Jews are set free from captivity. And I'll read that to you, that verse for you in a second here. But the thing to keep in mind is not all the Jews go home. Matter of fact, a very small percentage go home. Majority of them stay. And a lot of it is because it's the frontier. There's savages there, and it's been torn down, and you're living in the big city and you're being asked to go out on the frontier. And oh, by the way, the Assyrians, one of the things the Assyrians loved to do was they would take different people groups and relocate them around the empire. So that's how we get with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were a group of people that the Assyrians had taken from elsewhere and inserted into the heart of Israel. And they're there, and so they don't necessarily like the Jews. And so why leave Persia when you've been set free if it's a hostile country? It's broken down, it's on the fringe of the empire, so you don't have the walls of the city aren't even standing. And so there you have it. Anyway, so that's some context. And so Cyrus is the guy who sets the captives free and says, oh, by the way, you can go back and here's money to rebuild the temple. And so he says this. This is the gentleman who's in Esther. This is his grandpa. And so Cyrus, it's in Ezra. Matter of fact, right at the beginning of the book, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled." And Jeremiah said this was going to happen 70 years. I'm going to call you back. Anyways, the Lord stirred up the spirit in Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. And so you're going to find out Persia is going to own from Afghanistan to Turkey to the Mediterranean and down to Egypt. And so they've got a big, huge swath of property. So he makes this proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is among you of all his people." So he's just like, he's thrown the invite out. "May his God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord of Israel. He is God, which is in Jerusalem." So this, at the time of the book of Esther, this is 30 years after that proclamation is made. And so there's the all call throughout the emperor, "Hey guys, whoever wants to go back, because God has said, rebuild your house. But a very few group of people go there, which is troubling, I will agree. And so you're kind of left with this, okay, you got all these Jews in Persia, what are they still doing there? Because if you notice, I've titled this chapter, Comfortable Captives. And so that's a little bit troubling, but it's not for the reasons where I just stated. But Jeremiah talked about this. He says in the 29th chapter, God had told the people through Jeremiah, "Go get comfortable." And so I'll read that to you. But there's a caveat there, and I'll read that to you too. So anyways, it's in Jeremiah 29. It's going to be verses 4 through 14. I'm going to jump around a little bit, so stay with me. Verse 4 says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all who were carried away captive, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and dwell in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit, take wives and begot sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, so that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there and not diminished." Okay. "And seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it. For in its peace you will have peace." And that's kind of like, it's the, hey, get comfortable there. Grow, have families, have kids, have grandkids, Get comfortable and pray for that city. Okay, so skipping down to verse 10, "For thus says the Lord, after 70 years are completed at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word toward you and cause you to return to this place." And that was the book of Daniel. And that we talked about those last 3 chapters. That was the visit. Okay, skip down to verse 12. "I will be found by you, says the Lord, and I will bring you back from your captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places where I have driven you, says the Lord, and I will bring you to the place from which I caused you to be carried away captive." Okay, and so there you have it. There's Jesus, or not Jesus. Well, if you go listen to my last 3 chapters, I believe it's Jesus. But God says, I'm going to call you back, and so that's the visitor. Like I said, go go listen to the last 3 chapters of Daniel, and it's very interesting. I think that's a Christophany, a visit from Jesus. So as I said earlier too, there's a huge reason not to go, because it's a frontier, and Nehemiah kind of breaks that out. In Nehemiah, once again, the beginning of the first chapter, verses 2 through 4, it says, "Hamani, one of the brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them according to the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem." So he's basically, hey, give me a report on how things are going. "And they said to me, the survivors who are left," which is interesting. Survivors who are left, which tells you it's not good, "from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire." Okay, and so this is going to be Nehemiah is the cupbearer for Artaxerxes, and that's Xerxes' successor, his son. And so Nehemiah is reporting this. So this is after Esther, and so you can tell that it makes sense why in Esther's time people aren't going back, because it's not doing well. It's not doing well, and so Nehemiah wrote that. And Artaxerxes gives him permission and supplies to go back and rebuild the wall. And Nehemiah 6:15 it says, "So the wall was finished on the 25th day of Ulad in 52 days." And so there's part of me that's kind of torn there, because it's yes, the place is bad, and I apologize because I'm outside and I think the gnats have found me. They keep biting me. Anyways. That was a total side note. But it's understandable in Esther's time that they hadn't gone back because it was dangerous. But, I mean, look at that. In Nehemiah from chapter 6, verse 15. They rebuilt the walls in 52 days. And so, it was bad, but God had called them to go back. And so there's this hesitancy to trust God in some areas. And we'll talk about that more a little bit. So, ready to get into Esther. Esther chapter 1, verse 1. "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus," and that's why I want to go to Xerxes. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia in those days when the king Ezra, I'm just going to say Xerxes, sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel. Okay, so you have to understand this is fulfilling Jeremiah 11, verse 2. And so Jeremiah says, Daniel says that there's going to be 4 kings, and the 4th one will be the strongest. This is him. This is Xerxes. It's Daniel 11, verse 2. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, but the 4th shall be the richer than them all. We're about to find out how rich he is here in a second. By his strength through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. And so this chapter, we're going to learn just how rich this guy is. This guy's pretty rich. All right, so Xerxes is a Greek name, and they named him that, and the name means mighty man. I always find the names fascinating for what their meaning is. And he appears on the scene 65 years after. 65 years, I think that's right. Now I'm checking my I gotta go check my notes afterwards. And he's in Susa, Shushan. The Greeks called that Susa, and I told you the Greeks wrote history, so it's in my brain as Susa. And so that's the administrative capital of Persia. And I find it even fascinating too, is in Daniel 8, Daniel actually goes to Susa and prophesies while in the surrounding of Susa, which is kind of like a confirmation that, at least I look at it as a little bit of a confirmation that God knew that the Jews were going to remain in Persia, and he's actually in that setting that they're familiar with is speaking prophecy. And as I said from Daniel, the very private first chapter of Daniel, Susa is also where Daniel's believed to be buried. So then in the verse, I don't have my glasses here, verse 3, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, whom he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Okay, so this is the 3rd year of his reign. We're going to find out too that at least in the first 3 chapters, you're going to see jumps. There's 4-year gap between chapter 1 and chapter 2, and there's a 5-year gap between chapter 2 and chapter 3. And so the first 3 chapters jump quite a bit. And the writer for Esther timestamps each of the first 3 chapters as to how long it was since the last one. Okay, and they all reference it basically in reference to Xerxes, how long Xerxes has been in. So he's doing this 180 days, 6-month party. Remember it said in Daniel how rich he was going to be, the richest of them all. And so he's going to have a feast, and all his power players are going to be there. And it's going to be business and politicking. I had a job in the Navy where I used to do plans and exercises. And so I would travel around these planning conferences, and we would plan military exercises. And we could do a week-long exercise probably in about anywhere from 3 days to a week. We would actually take about a week to plan a week-long exercise. And so and a lot of negotiations between different nations as to, hey, the Greeks need this training and the Americans need this training, and so here's how we can scratch each other's back. And so a week-long conference wouldn't be uncommon for a week-long exercise. So here he's got 6 months of this party going on, and he's got all his power players there. And it kind of reminds me too, when I was doing these plans and exercises, I was doing them under Sixth Fleet, but also Sixth Fleet works with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And at that time, we even had Partnership for Peace, was the former Eastern Bloc nations who wanted to be part of NATO. And one of the things that I quickly learned is with NATO, we would have planning conferences, and then we would have social events afterwards. And I think planning was done in the social events than there was actually in the meeting themselves. Often the meetings were clobbered with arguments, particularly the Greeks and the Turks. They don't like each other. And so these social events, we tended to get a whole bunch of more work done, which I thought really married up well with this 6-month party. Okay, and so we don't have a whole lot of details about the event, because we're going to hear some details, because there's three parties, and we're going to find out a little bit more details about the other ones, but not so much about this. But we do know that for all three parties, the word feast indicates a drinking festival. And so these are, the wine is flowing, the spirits are flowing, and a lot of this is in this 6-month deal. Is, yes, it's a big, huge military campaign that he's got to convince those that he can do it. He's got to plan it, that he, how to do it, and he's got to get everybody on board, and he's sparing no expenses in convincing them that they are capable of it. So that's the first feast. Verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days. This is feast number 2. For all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So he's invited them in. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords, and fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, and the vessels being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Okay, so we got feast number 2 here. This is a 7-day feast, and I refer this as the feeding of the alligators. This is feeding the swamp. This is Washington, D.C., the swamp. And so he's got all the providences came in for 6 months to plan his military exercise. Now he's feeding the swamp. He's got to feed the swamp, and it's luxuriously decorated. I thought it was over the top with these wine dispensers, but it's still a drinking feast. Okay, that there's drinking going on. Okay, and I also thought it was the point is made here that it's non-compulsory drinking, and so that seems kind of odd. So it means it signifies perhaps because that it was compulsory during the 6 month. Everybody was going to drink it, and so the wine was really flowing. But I also looked at it too. The people are invited into the king's palace, and the good wine is out. And so part of me just says, okay, it's a different clientele. This is every Joe Schmuckatelli who lives in Susa is invited in. And oh, by the way, if they don't want to drink, let's not force this expensive wine into them. The part of it is a little kind of backing off of the generosity. If you guys don't want to drink because the wine's really expensive and you're not worth it, that's totally fine. But there's a couple things going on here too. Why do that? Why invite the swamp into the king's palace? Perhaps one of the things is just to remind them of his wealth and power. Another one is to maybe assure them, hey, king entrusts you enough to invite you in. Okay. Another one was keep your, how's that saying? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Just kind of keep the people in the capital okay with the king being the king. There is no official business done here, and so we're going to find out that the king's going to let his hair down. Okay, so let's read on. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Xerxes. Okay, so we got feast number 3. This is going to be a 7-day feast for the women of the court. All right, and I'm kind of wondering on this too. Is like why is the queen doing this? Why is she having her own little party? Because it is a feast. It is a drinking feast. So the queen parties. Um, uh, I don't know. I'm kind of stuck with this, and I'm thinking too. I could be totally wrong in this. Totally wrong in this. But if it's the women of the court, there's no political agenda. This is a ladies' retreat. And it might have been that. It might have been the fact that the women felt a little, the men's partying was a little too aggressive, or maybe it's a cultural norm that the women partied separate from the men. I don't know, but there's a part of me that felt like this shouldn't have happened. And anyways, that's just my 2 cents. And I'm probably looking at through 21st century cultural eyes. I don't know. What are we up to here? Verse 10. Verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, remember I told you he let his hair down. He commanded, and so we got a series of names here. Human, Bistha, Harbona, Bitha, Abagatha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials. And she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious and his anger burned. We're talking more about that. But anyways, so seventh day, 7th eunuchs are sent to go to fetch the queen. And I looked up their names. There's nothing significant there. But I thought it was interesting when you're thinking about names and what they mean. Vashti means beautiful. And what's interesting too is if you look at it, her name means beautiful, and he wants her to come in order to show her beauty to the people, for she was beautiful, as her name suggests. Okay, and so, and I apologize too if I often, a little insight here, whether you like this or not. Women are sometimes referred to as arm candy, and they make us look good. And so I'm gonna, as uncomfortable as that may sound, but I'm going to refer to because if a woman's beauty is what we're judging her on, that is really, guys, that's the wrapper. We really need to deal with what's inside the wrapper. And so I looked at, if you look at women in that sense, you're missing what's inside, and what's inside is what's really is where the beauty is. And I say this in all honesty, is that what's inside a woman, what makes up that woman, is really where her beauty lies. And these guys are stuck on the outside. They're stuck on the wrapper. So let's look at inside. Let's take the wrapper off. And so there's there was 3 things I looked at, and then maybe 2 if you want to boil it down. That it's what God looks at, and that's what we should look at. And I'm speaking mostly to the men here, and in particularly to the single men who are looking at, a prospective wife, and they're looking at the wrapper. And I'm telling you, here's some things you should look at. First thing, look at the heart. Okay, 1 Samuel 16:7 says, and this is the way the Lord looks at it. The Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So look at the heart, and to the ladies, that should be what you're working on, is your heart. Where is your heart at? Okay, and particularly for the heart, in your heart, women and men, you look for women who do this, who fear the Lord, because that's the beginning of wisdom, right? Proverbs 31:30, that whole chapter, that's nothing too if you want to look at the attributes of a godly woman. Go look at Proverbs 31. 31:30 says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised." And last but not least and this is kind of maybe counterculture to where we are today, is a quiet and gentle spirit. 1 Peter 3, verses 3 and 4 says, "Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of the Lord." So those are some things to look for, because we're going to find out with Xerxes, it's all about the rapper. It's all about the rapper, and he's trying to get Vashti, to show her off, and she obviously, for whatever reason, doesn't feel comfortable appearing in front of a group of drunken men to show off her beauty. And it was kind of interesting at some commentators, and if you've listened to any of my teachings, I'm not very high on commentators, but some commentators had talked about the possibility that he says to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown, that was all she was wearing and all she was ordered to wear. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's just a matter of, well, we're going to find out later that kings typically have many wives. The queen wears the crown. And so to have her come out with her crown was just signifying this is the king's wife, which is the queen. And so I don't buy those things. But anyways, some of those commentaries, I think that's just, I don't know. I'll leave that up for something else. Verse 13. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, and that's an interesting statement there. For this was the king's manner toward all who knew the law and justice, those closest to him being, and we got a series of we're going to find 7 guys as well: Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media. And remember that there's 7 princes and there's 7 advisors, because when we get to chapter 1, you're going to find from these 7, actually, an 8th one will rise and supersede those guys. Kind of spirit of Antichrist. But anyways, that's chapter 3. I digress. So you got these 7 princes of Persia and Media, and who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do with Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she did not obey the command of the king, Xerxes, brought to her by the eunuchs. Okay, so we got these 7 wise guys, princes, and the saying there is who understand the times. Now that saying, the word there for times is astrological times. In other words, the bigger picture. These men understood. They didn't look at things in the here and now. They looked, I teach my kids in AP World, look at the context. Look at, is this event happening amidst a bigger era? This was the era of these things happening, and this is one of those things. And so these guys were looking at the bigger picture. And so to me, it seems to me that in that time frame, they were wrestling with where is a woman's role in a marriage, or where is the queen's role in the kingdom. So this was part of a bigger picture that they were wrestling with. And apparently there weren't laws governing it, because we're going to find out they're going to come up with a law. And so the guy who ends up coming up with the brilliant brainstorm is the last guy, Memucan, which his name means dignified. So this is the dignified solution we're going to come up with. And so, like I said, they're come up with a fix for what the queen had done. So verse 16, and Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people. And this is where you kind of get this idea. There's a bigger picture. Something's afoot here of, women and their placement in society, and anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Not only wronged the king, but also the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes, when they report. King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. So this is going to be a catalyst here. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, you're going to hear that pleasing the king is kind of like the mantra throughout this whole book. If it pleases the king, let the royal decree go out from him, and let the recorded in the laws of the Persians, so we're going to write a law, and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before the king Xerxes, and let the king give her royal positions to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And so there you see the bigger picture being kind of unfolded. So dignified kind of lays it out that there's some insecurity between husbands losing control of their wives. All right, and so or possibly there was just a widespread discontent amongst the women, where they were just looking for an excuse to, okay, hey, it's precedence. That's the word I'm looking for. The queen set a precedence, and we're going to follow that precedence. If it's good enough for the queen, it's good enough for us. And so there is the men out there aren't being good husbands. Let's put it that way. And we'll talk about what a good husband is here. And so the solution to the queen's disobedience is: do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to jail. You're no longer, you're dismissed. Okay, so let's. This is a good time to actually sit down and say, okay, this is what the world has come up with. Their solution, this is the dignified solution. If I could use the gentleman's name to signify that was what they considered a dignified solution. Let's look at what the word says. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's culturally different. What God says how a marriage should function is culturally different from the word. And I'm not even talking about Xerxes' time. I'm talking about today. So let me go with that. And so, and I'm going to key on just a couple areas here. I'm going to read the whole section and then extract just kind of like a husband responsibilities and wife responsibilities. But I'm going to go to Ephesians. I'm in the 5th chapter, in verses 22 through 28. And you're going to see there's some roles for wives, and there's some roles and responsibilities for husbands as well. Anyway, so verse 22: Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church. And he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water of the word, that he might present her to himself, a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh and bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Okay, and so there it is. That is the biblical, and it's biblical in a Christian sense. Everything is kind of tied in between Christ and the church and husbands and wives. And so there's a definite order here. And so, and keep in mind, this is the marriage covenant. And in a marriage covenant, both parties enter in voluntarily. So if you're entering into a covenant and you're entering into a biblical covenant, this is the order in which it should go. Okay? And so I didn't make up these rules. This is not Jim Crouch's writing. This is God's writing. And so the wife's covenant, her portion of the covenant, is first to submit to her husband. And that, quite honestly, is yielding her authority to him. Okay? And so when decisions, and I can speak from my family, when decisions are being made, we have discussions. But in the end, I cast the vote. And so, and Sandra and I have a really kind of we remind ourselves of this all the time. We have a really good agreement, is not to say I told you so. When a decision is made and it doesn't work out great, and this goes for both parties, because she'll make decisions on things she wants to do too, and I'll voice my opinion, and it's not a hill to die on, or it's not critical. I don't have to have my way on that particular thing. And if it doesn't work out, or same thing goes for me, I make a decision and she voices her opinion, but yields to my authority. We don't say I told you so. And so it's kind of cool. It's like when you make decisions, I don't really think you need to hear I told you so. I know if I made a decision based upon the information I had before me, and I later find out that was a bad decision because I hadn't taken into consideration A, B, and C, and maybe Sandra had mentioned A was a possibility, or maybe she mentioned A, B, and C all were a possibility of happening, and I didn't believe her, and it happened. I don't need the I told you so. I already know that, okay. If anything else, it leads to have more faith in our relationship, and so that's kind of cool. So I spent a long time on that one. Submit to the husband. So that's yielding authority to him. The other thing is to respect the husband. So submit and respect. And so respect, basically, you are taking the husband's feelings, concerns, desires into account. You are integrating them into you. They now have become a part of you as a wife, and so you are now respecting his feelings, his thoughts, his yada yada. Fill in the list. Those are integrated into you. All right, they are part of you, and even to some degree given a priority. And so those are the two things, according to this section, that are incumbent upon the wife. All right, now husbands. We think, woohoo, we got the easy street. No, we don't. We're supposed to love our wives. The first thing is love. Love our wives, and it's to the point of death. It's a selfish love. It's putting them first. And there's two things we're supposed to be working on. We're supposed to be nourishing and cherishing. Okay, and so nourishing is providing those things that are required for growth, okay? And that's spirit, body, mental things, all, the whole complete picture. What's required for healthy growth? We need to be providing that. And so, I'm terrible at this, but that even includes recreation. Sandra loves to hike. I hate it. But I know that nourishes her. When she can get out on a hike and she can see a great vista. See, I'd just as soon take my little drones and go fly up and see that same vista and be, hey, Sandra, I'm with you. I like those vistas, but my way of achieving it doesn't require such exertion to the point of exhaustion. And so, but that's to nourish her. I do those things. And the other thing is to cherish. And cherish speaks to a mental state that we as husbands should have. If we cherish our wives, we do all that we do in a loving manner, and they know that they are that we love them. And we had a conversation. Sarah and I had a conversation on cherish. Cherish is the engine, and love is the gasoline. And so cherish is the way that we do things, the way it's carried out by the love that we have. And that was the best I could describe it to her. And maybe that's a good way, maybe that's not a way. But cherish is our protection and our care in a loving manner of our wives. And so that's, in a nutshell, that's the correct way that a marriage is supposed to function. Wives, submit and respect. Husbands, love, cherish, and nourish. Okay, that was a long one, but anyways, I wanted to go over that because I thought it was good. We're almost done with the chapter anyways. 21. And the reply, please the king. There's a big deal. No surprise there. Like I said, you're going to see, please the king, please the king, please the king. Xerxes is very much centered on pleasure. Okay? And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan, Mr. Dignified. Then he sent letters to all the king's province, to each province of its own script, to every people in their own language, that each man should be master of his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. All right. So, solution to the problem: make the husband the master. Okay, not a good solution. But anyways, that's how chapter 1 ends. And so, again, I'm going to leave you, as I always do, leave you with a few chapters, or a few questions to ponder for the chapter. And so this one has to regarding to the Jews living in captivity. What area of captivity in your lives has the Lord caused you to step out of, that you have been hesitant to do so? And so there are some things that it's whether it's your old life, you're trapped in habits of your old life, where God has freed you from those habits, freed you from that sin, but you've been hesitant to step out. That's the first question. Examine those things. We also see in the parting that there's an additive added to fuel the fires. And so I wanted to just kind of give you a reflection point back to is what additive in your social gatherings do you typically introduce, and how's that working for you? And I'm referring just to I think we all need from time to time just to re-examine ourselves if alcohol is being introduced or some other substances being introduced that's artificial. Are we dependent upon that for our happiness and our good times, or are we diving deep into friendships and fellowship? That was the second question I had. Just to kind of take a look at those. And then my last question for you was, how does that Ephesians 5, verses 22 through 28, how does that sit with you regarding responsibilities of husbands and wife? And what issues are you like? Is it, hey, no problems with me, I'm straight in line with that? Or it's like, I have a problem with this and this. I want you to examine those things and take those things before the Lord and go read that. It's just, I'm not making anything up here. Go read that and go talk to the Lord about that. So if you have any problems with the Ephesians 5 sections on husbands and wives, go take a look at that. And so that is, for my friends, that is all I have for you. And so it was good to get back. And I'll probably have Esther 2 out in the next couple of days, because I'm up into Esther 3. We just got back from a camping trip and was gone for a little over a month. And here's those gnats back. A little over a month. And so was studying all these chapters and got them all prepared to teach, but was doing too many things. Plus, we had grandkids. I mean, who wants to sit in front of a computer and talk to a computer when you got grandkids to play with, right? Am I wrong? So anyways, I'll get Esther 2 out, and who knows, maybe be this afternoon. We'll see. Although it's supposed to be pretty hot today. I don't know if I want to be outside for that. Anyways, so blessings, and we'll learn about Esther in chapter 2. See ya.